Hello and welcome back. It's 9:30 in Paris. Let's give you a reminder of our top stories here on France 24. Could it be a lifeline for Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff? The acting speaker has annulled a crucial vote back in April that set the wheels in motion for her impeachment. Confusion reigns as to where the proceedings go from here. 7 men go on trial in Belgium. They're part of a terror cell that was broken up last year, and they're thought to have links with the Paris and Brussels attacks. And UEFA's president, Michel Platini, stands down after a court refused to overturn his ban from football. The former French football hero will be barred from the game for the next 4 years. Thanks for being with us. And in Brazil, confusion reigns after the acting speaker of the lower house has annulled a crucial vote in April that allowed impeachment proceedings against President Dilma Rousseff to go on to the Senate. Valdir Maranhão, who's standing in after the previous speaker, Eduardo Cunha, was suspended, said there were irregularities during the April vote. President Rousseff urged caution upon hearing the news and said there was still a hard fight ahead.
This coup d'etat is disguised by an impeachment process. An impeachment process that's without basis and illegal. An appeal has now been accepted, and that impeachment process has been suspended.
Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff speaking there. And earlier I spoke to Richard Thompson, our correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, and I asked him whether this ruling this new announcement came as a surprise.
This was very much a surprise, and it even caught the president on the hop, so to speak. She was at a speaking engagement and basically announced the impeachment process was suspended, but also said nothing was official and urged her supporters to be cautious. Basically, this decision was made at the request of Rousseff's legal counsel. The acting speaker of the lower house, Valdir Maranhão, said there were procedural flaws in the vote in the lower house last month. That dramatic vote, you recall, in which a majority of members voted in favour of impeaching Rousseff on charges that she broke fiscal laws to hide the budget deficit. Maranhão said members were unduly influenced by their parties, and the way it played out with members speaking individually as they cast their votes was prejudicial against the president. And essentially, in a statement, he said he wants a rerun of that vote in the lower house.
And Richard, where does this leave the impeachment process now?
Well, there's a question mark, obviously, over where it goes from here. The process is currently with the Senate, the upper house. Members were supposed to vote on Wednesday, and they were widely expected to vote in favour of impeaching Rousseff. But with this decision by Maranhão, it's unclear whether that will go ahead as planned. Since the process was no longer with the lower house, senators may argue the annulment doesn't affect proceedings. Deputies in the lower house may also appeal the decision, and how long that takes could affect the timetable for the impeachment process, assuming it continues, of course. But whatever happens, ultimately, this just adds to the political uncertainty Brazil has been living with for months now. And even if Rousseff was suspended, Vice President Michel Temer is, by all accounts, far from forming a coherent government.
Our correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, Richard Thompson, there. Now, he's nicknamed the Punisher, and he's almost certainly about to become the Philippines' new president. Polls are now closed after a day of local and national elections, and unofficial tallies show Rodrigo Duterte comfortably ahead of his nearest rival. Duterte has promised to kill criminals, not an empty threat, because as mayor of Davao City, he was renowned for turning a blind eye to extrajudicial killings and has even boasted about it, hence the nickname. Luke Shrego tells us more about him.
It's been the Philippines' most divisive presidential race in years. But candidate Rodrigo Duterte seems to have struck just the right note with voters.
Kill people for petty crimes, then you must be a petty human being. And it would be sad and a tragedy for this country to have a petty president. I've been targeting against drug lords and all.
It's tough talking like that and more which has garnered the longtime mayor of the southern city of Davao the nickname Duterte Harry and left ordinary Filipinos tired of widespread poverty, crime and corruption flocking to his banner.
Of course it's Duterte. We are for Duterte and no one else.
I chose Duterte because if he wins, he will bring great changes to our country.
However, Duterte's iron fist approach to crime has left others with some apprehension.
I'm worried. I'm worried because he will declare martial law. And it's not democracy anymore.
She's not alone. Duterte's pugnacious tone sparked criticism from his opponents and even outgoing President Benigno Aquino, who warned he could put the country back on the path to dictatorship. Beyond boasting of Viagra-fueled affairs, Duterte also caused international disgust, following off-colour comments about an Australian missionary who was raped and murdered in the Philippines in 1989.
There's been shock in Austria after the Chancellor resigned earlier. Werner Faymann lost support of his centrist coalition colleagues after the party suffered a humiliating defeat at the polls last month at the hands of the far right. He's also stepped down from his role as head of the Social Democratic Party. Faymann had been under pressure from trade unionists and his party's youth wing for his tough stance on asylum laws. And there's been more violence near the Syrian city of Aleppo. It's centred around the strategic town of Khan Tuman, which was seized by Islamist rebels last week. Government forces and their allies have carried out more than 90 air raids in the area in less than 48 hours. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. A recent surge in violence has broken a temporary ceasefire agreement which was orchestrated by the US and Russia. Peace talks in Geneva broke up last month without any real progress. And in response to continued violence in Syria, France's foreign minister organised a meeting earlier here in Paris between representatives from countries allied against President Assad. The US Secretary of State John Kerry was here too and sounded cautiously optimistic about reinstating a temporary truce. Our chief foreign affairs editor, Rob Parsons, was at the Foreign Ministry where that meeting was taking place, and he sent this report.
Well, this was never going to be a meeting that was going to reach conclusions. This was more a meeting of the ministers supporting the Syrian opposition to ensure that all of them are on the same page. In particular, that when they go to the Vienna meeting on Syria next week, which will be attended, of course, by not just them, but also the Syrian government, Russia and Iran, that there is a united position. Jean-Marc Ayrault, the French foreign minister, speaking at the end of the meeting to journalists, said this is a critical moment in the conflict, that they had to double up their efforts to make sure that the road to peace was still open, that particular pressure had to be brought to bear on the Syrian government to ensure that it honoured its commitments to letting humanitarian aid get through, that it honoured the ceasefire agreements that had been made. But interestingly too, Jean-Marc Ayrault said that he referred to a declaration made by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, issued today, calling on all sides to honour their commitments. And afterwards, speaking to Federica Mogherini, the European foreign policy chief, she underlined that very point, saying that it's not just the Syrian government that has to be subjected to pressure, but the opposition too. And in particular, she focused in on one aspect, that the opposition forces in Aleppo have to separate off from the al-Nusra Front. Remember that al-Nusra, like the Islamic State organization, is not party to the agreement on a ceasefire. She emphasized that the opposition had to separate from the al-Nusra Front. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult to make the ceasefire hold.
And some news on that same story that's just coming into us, apparently from the Syrian military. The Aleppo ceasefire, that ceasefire that had been broken or part broken, will be extended for another 48 hours starting on Tuesday morning. As I say, that's according to the Syrian military. We'll bring you more on that when we have it. Heightened security in Brussels now as the trial begins of a terrorist cell. 7 men have appeared in court and another 9 have been charged in absentia. They're on the run. It all dates back to a police raid of a house in Verviers in eastern Belgium 16 months ago. Since then, links have been made between the Verviers cell and the attacks in both Paris last November and in Brussels in March. Oliver Farry brings us up to date.
The residents of this dormitory town will remember for a long time the events of the night of January 15th, 2015. Belgian special forces launched an attack on this apartment. 213 rounds of gunfire were exchanged, 2 grenades thrown. Police shot dead 2 men. A third tried to escape via the window. Investigators found the makings of 5 kilograms of explosives, 3 Kalashnikovs, 4 handguns and police uniforms hidden in a sofa.
This group was on the verge of carrying out terrorist attacks with the aim of killing police in public and in police stations.
It was a success for Belgian intelligence services, who managed to quickly locate terrorists returned from Syria and monitor them before swooping. But there was more to it. Directing things from a bolt hole in Athens was Abdelhamid Abaoud, who would later take part in the Paris attacks last November and was also planning others in Brussels.
In Abaoud's hideaway in Athens were found, among other documents, a map of Brussels Airport. And Brussels Airport will be attacked on the 22nd of March 2016, 18 months after the Verviers case.
Abaoud was killed in a police raid on an apartment days after the Paris attacks. 2 jihadists were killed during the Verviers raid, but 16 of their accomplices stand trial Monday. The trial is expected to last 3 weeks.
UEFA's president, Michel Platini, has announced he will be stepping down after failing to have a 6-year ban from football overturned. The former French footballing hero was found guilty last year of an ethics breach over a €1.8 million payment he received from former FIFA head Sepp Blatter. Mariam Saab explains.
Ready to get the ball rolling in Lausanne. Just over a week ago, an optimistic Michel Platini was pitching to boot out a 6-year ban imposed by FIFA last year.
Today is the start of the match, a new match. We're in the final. We're all at the same point. I hope the result will be a good one.
While Platini's game plan fell short of an all-out win, the embattled UEFA president managed to score a few points with the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Cutting the former France international some slack, the panel known as Sport's Supreme Court reduced Europe's football boss's sanctions from 6 to 4 years. Once €72,000 out of pocket, Platini is now up for a €54,000 fine. Effectively sidelined, the verdict removes Platini from the top post by ensuring that his ban runs beyond his current UEFA mandate, which ends in March of 2019. Disappointed by what he calls an injustice, Platini announced he'll step down as UEFA president at the organisation's next Congress. Guilty of a conflict of interest, Platini has been dogged by a payment of $2 million made by Blatter's FIFA to Platini in 2011, behaviour slammed by the tribunal as unethical. Denials of wrongdoing fell on deaf ears. The pair were banned by the FIFA Ethics Committee last October. The latest ruling has ended Platini's hopes of replacing Blatter at the helm of FIFA.
Now, if you're a stargazer, I probably don't need to tell you that earlier you had the chance to witness a pretty special and a pretty rare sight. Mercury flew directly across the face of the sun. It started about 7 hours ago, and NASA has created an animation to show you its trajectory. This only happens once every 10 years. But it's notoriously difficult to catch because Mercury's too small to see without a super strong telescope, and even then you'd need very strong sunglasses to protect your eyes. So for now, those pictures are all we're going to be seeing. That's it from me, but don't go anywhere because Georgia will be here in a minute with all your African news in Eye on Africa. Thanks for watching this edition of Live from Paris.